The Imperial War Council laughed at the human desk jockey until he logistically deleted their main fleet. The Grand Chamber of the Xylos Star Empire's High War Council echoed with rich, resonant laughter. Upon the central obsidian holotable drifted a three-dimensional rendering of the Sol system, surrounded by a meager perimeter of antiquated orbital monitors and 3 rusty human refueling stations. Facing them stood Ambassador Charles Vance, a middle-aged Terran bureaucrat clad in a charcoal gray, off-the-rack business suit, clutching a sleek obsidian tablet under his arm. "Let me understand this, human," rumbled Supreme Commander Vroth, his 4 amber eyes crinkling with sadistic amusement. "Your entire planetary defense consists of 3 diplomatic frigates and a wet piece of paper you call a non-aggression pact." "Not quite, Commander," Charles replied smoothly, his voice devoid of panic. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, tapping his tablet once. "It is an administrative compliance agreement, specifically subsection 4 of the Interstellar Trade and Navigation Accord. We are simply here to review your fleet's logistical registry prior to entry." The War Council erupted into renewed guffaws. High Fleet Admiral Krell slapped his massive, scaly knee, rattling his ceremonial chest medals. "Logistical registry," Krell bellowed. "We do not file forms, desk jockey, we bring fire. The Vanguard Armada is already dropping out of warp at the edge of your system. 2,000 dreadnoughts, powered by pure stellar plasma, carrying enough raw kinetic fury to grind your mudball into glowing gravel." Charles sighed, a quiet, weary sound unique to middle managers who had spent 20 years dealing with municipal zoning boards and budget deficits. "Well, that's unfortunate," Charles murmured, "because according to our orbital sensors, your Vanguard fleet is currently operating 24% over the subspace thermal emissions limit stipulated in Code Article 9. Which means, technically speaking, you aren't an invading military force anymore." Vroth stopped laughing, his eyes narrowed. "What did you say?" "You're an unregistered commercial utility anomaly," Charles said pleasantly, tapping his screen. "And under Terran Maritime and Interstellar Commercial Code, unregistered anomalies are subject to immediate asset repossession to cover potential environmental hazard fees." "Guards," Vroth snarled, his patience evaporating. "Drag this insolent paper pusher to the airlock and—" "Execution loop initiated," Charles interrupted, not raising his voice in the slightest. He clicked a single, unassuming red box on his tablet. "Have a nice afternoon, gentlemen." Before the elite guards could cross the dais, the air in the war chamber didn't explode, it shivered. Across the sector, 2,000 dreadnoughts of the Xylos Vanguard Armada had just dropped out of fold space into the Sol system, screaming toward Earth with weapon ports glowing. On the bridge of the flagship Vengeance Prime, Admiral Krell's tactical officer shrieked as every single console turned a violent, flashing amber. "Admiral, external sensors are registering a massive surge across all local subspace frequencies." "Fire the plasma batteries," Krell roared. "Obliterate their moon bases." "We can't, sir. The weapon control systems are locked." "Locked by what?" A pop-up window, sir," the officer cried, his multi-jointed fingers clawing at the glass. "It says we haven't completed our mandatory annual safety certification, and it's routing our reactor core output into a municipal recycling ledger." It wasn't a computer virus. It was something far more terrifying, a software spear. For 50 years, while the rest of the galaxy built bigger lasers and thicker armor plates, humanity had quietly embedded standardized commercial subroutines into every hyperspace relay, navigation beacon, and automated refueling buoy across 3 quadrants. They had weaponized bureaucracy. On the flagship, the main reactor containment field flickered. The digital interface didn't crash. It politely asked the crew to select their preferred language for asset liquidation. Warning: non-compliant capital asset detected. Initiating automated repossession sequence. Please ensure all personal effects are removed from the airlock before conversion. Across 2,000 ships, the hyperdense armor plating, the antimatter drives, and the organic hulls of the Xylo's armada systematically lost their legal definition as warships. Reclassified by automated administrative loops as abandoned industrial waste. The entire fleet was seamlessly tagged, sequestered, and converted into clean, unadulterated thermal energy to subsidize Earth's public transit grid. There was no sound of battle, no glorious interstellar dogfights. Just a brief, blinding flash of silent white light across the night sky of the Sol system as 2,000 invincible dreadnoughts were quietly balanced out on a spreadsheet, turning a massive imperial invasion force into free electricity for European high-speed rail lines. Back in the Imperial war chamber, the holographic rendering of the Xylo's armada flickered, hissed, and vanished entirely from the table. Silence descended upon the room. The laughter was gone, replaced by the cold, horrifying realization of a civilization that treated the apocalypse like a minor paperwork hurdle. Supreme Commander Vroth stared at the empty table, his jaw slack, his primary hands trembling. Where is my fleet? Charles Vance neatly slipped his tablet back under his arm, adjusted his tie, and offered a polite, corporate smile. Liquidated to cover processing fees, Commander, Charles said smoothly. If you'd like to contest the valuation, you can file an appeal with our regional office in Geneva, though I must warn you, the wait times are murder. The silence in the grand chamber of the Xylo's Star Empire was so heavy it felt structural. Supreme Commander Vroth remained frozen, his primary hands hovering over the obsidian holotable as if trying to grasp ships that had ceased to exist 3 minutes prior. Around him, members of the High War Council sat like statues carved from expensive, terrified stone. Liquidated, Vroth finally rasped, the word tasting like dry ash in his mouth. You deleted a 2,000 dreadnought Imperial armada with a compliance audit. It's not an audit, Commander, Charles Vance corrected gently, smoothing the lapel of his charcoal gray suit. It's a lien. Section 12B of the Interstellar Commerce and Safety Harmonization Treaty clearly states that any unregistered mass entering a sovereign lane without a pre-filed flight manifest is legally classified as abandoned orbital debris. Charles tapped his watch, checking the digital display with mild impatience. Now, if you gentlemen are quite finished attempting to overthrow our local municipal infrastructure, I have a 2:00 p.m. zoning hearing regarding a community garden in Sector 4. Unless, of course, you'd like to review your current tax bracket. High Fleet Admiral Krell, whose military career had spanned 4 centuries of glorious conquests, blood-drenched sieges, and planetary subjugation, slowly slid out of his high-backed chair and hit the polished floor with a dull, pathetic thud. He didn't even try to stand up. He just stared blankly at the ceiling, broken by the terrifying realization that his entire civilizations could be wiped out by a guy in business-casual attire who probably had strong opinions about office thermostat settings. Vroth swallowed hard, his 4 amber eyes wide with a newfound, primal terror. What do we need to do? Vroth whispered, his voice stripped of all imperial pride. Oh, it's quite simple, Charles smiled warmly, pulling a thick, double-sided stack of crisp white forms from his briefcase and setting them neatly on the obsidian table. You'll need to fill out Form 88B for preliminary diplomatic recognition. Submit a notarized copy of your planetary asset ledger in triplicate. Pay a modest 50-credit filing fee per star system. and transition your entire military budget over to our public works department for infrastructure subsidization." Charles turned and began walking toward the grand vaulted doors of the chamber, his hard-soled shoes clicking rhythmically against the stone. "Take your time, gentlemen," Charles called back over his shoulder, not breaking his stride. "The submission deadline is Friday at 5. Late filings incur a 12% administrative penalty. Have a wonderful afternoon." The heavy titanium doors hissed shut behind him, sealing the greatest war council in the galaxy inside a room with a stack of tax forms and a lesson they would never, ever forget. You can conquer planets with lasers, but you lose them to paperwork. The doors hissed shut, leaving the remnants of the Xylo's High War Council in absolute, echoing silence. Supreme Commander Vroth remained frozen in his chair, staring dumbly at the thick stack of crisp white forms sitting in the center of the obsidian table. Beside him, Admiral Krell let out a low, pathetic moan from the floor, his ceremonial chest medals clinking against the polished stone. "Commander," a shivering junior aide murmured, creeping out from behind a massive marble pillar. What do we do with the forms?" Vroth slowly turned his head, his 4 amber eyes bloodshot and hollow. He looked at the paperwork, at the neat little boxes labeled taxpayer identification number, sector asset depreciation, and sign and date in black ink only, and felt a chill colder than any void in deep space. "Hand me a pen," Vroth whispered, his voice trembling. "And God help us, check if we have enough spare change for the filing fee." Meanwhile, 3 sectors away on Earth, the digital transfer of the Xylo's fleet's raw mass had fully cleared. Inside the central processing hub of the Terran Department of Administrative Corrections in Geneva, a massive holographic ledger flashed green as 2,000 converted dreadnoughts officially registered as municipal property. Sarah Chen stood by the main terminal, watching the energy transference metrics settle into a neat, perfectly balanced column. She took a sip of her coffee and looked over at Charles Vance, who had just stepped out of the private transport shuttle back from the Xylo's embassy. "Welcome back, Charles," Sarah smiled, setting her mug down. "How did the diplomatic summit go?" Charles calmly hung his trench coat on the rack, straightened his tie, and adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. "Productive," Charles replied smoothly, pulling a crisp, notarized envelope from his briefcase and placing it neatly on his desk. "They've agreed to restructure their entire military-industrial complex into a public works sanitation guild. The first batch of filing fees should clear by midnight." Sarah chuckled, shaking her head. "You know, sometimes I forget how terrifying you are. Whole empires spend centuries building fleets to conquer the galaxy, and you just walk in there with a stapler and repossess their entire civilization." "It's not terrifying, Sarah. It's organization," Charles said, sitting down at his desk and firing up his terminal. He pulled up a map of the Orion Arm, now dotted with hundreds of neat, glowing green checkmarks where rogue empires used to be. "The universe is a chaotic place. Someone has to keep the books." He tapped a key, opening a fresh document on his screen, and paused to take a sip of his coffee. "Now," Charles muttered, leaning forward with a focused glint in his eye, "let's see who's next on the audit schedule." The next target on Charles Vance's digital clipboard was the Varian Concordat, a sprawling empire of silicon-based merchant warlords who controlled the rich trade routes of the Perseus Arm. For 3 centuries, they had levied heavy tolls on every independent freighter crossing their space, treating the Outer Rim like their personal toll booth. They also hadn't updated their galactic navigation licenses since the previous millennium. 2 hours after the Xylo's annexation, a high-priority subspace transmission beamed directly into the primary throne room of the Varian High Assembly. There were no warnings, No battle fleets dropping out of warp. Just a blinking notification light on the central obsidian dais, followed by a crisp, automated audio recording in 17 standardized galactic dialects. Notice of pending administrative action. This is an automated compliance verification from the Terran Department of Administrative Corrections. Your commercial trade lane permits have expired. You have 24 standard hours to provide proof of current cosmic zoning clearance and settle outstanding transit tariff balances, or your trade routes will be reclassified as public domain. The High Assembly erupted into derisive laughter. Transit tariffs? High Executor Zalthor scoffed, his crystalline shoulders clicking with amusement. They threaten us with bureaucratic letters, deploy the planetary defense grid, charge the mass drivers, let these hairless apes know what happens when they try to tax the Varian merchants. The planetary defense grid powered up instantly, drawing massive amounts of energy from the local geothermal core. Across a dozen Varian worlds, anti-ship batteries swung skyward, glowing with fierce, plasma-charged intensity. 10 seconds later, the defense grid locked up. It wasn't a cyber attack, it was a digital eviction notice. Because the Varian Concordat had routed their planetary defense power grids through the same commercial subspace relays they used for intersystem trade, they had accidentally tied their military hardware to their corporate tax profiles. And according to Terran regulatory code, unpaid commercial tariffs constituted a breach of utility lease agreements. On the grand holoscreen before the High Assembly, the terrifying display of military might suddenly vanished, replaced by a massive, brightly colored pop-up window. Critical error. Asset seizure in progress. Your planetary core-tapping rights have been suspended due to non-payment of interstellar utility fees. To restore power, please enter your corporate tax ID and remit 4.2 billion credits immediately. What is happening? Zalthor shrieked, hammering his crystal fist against the control console. Where is our power? Why are the life support systems dimming? Sir, an administrator gasped, sliding frantically across the polished floor. The automated software spears. They've locked out the reactor core controls. They've classified our entire planetary crust as unauthorized commercial squatting. Before the High Executor could issue another command, the lights in the throne room flickered once, twice, and died completely. Across the capital world, the great towering spires of the Varian merchant lords went dark, replaced by the emergency amber glow of backup battery cells. High above the planet, silent and majestic, 3 Terran administrative utility vessels quietly moved into geostationary orbit. They weren't armed with torpedoes or lasers. They carried high-capacity data siphons and heavy-duty legal seals. A single transmission beamed down from the lead vessel, patch-routed directly into Zalthor's personal communicator. This is Charles Vance, Department of Administrative Corrections. A calm, unhurried voice echoed through the dark throne room. Your trade routes have been seized, your planetary crust has been placed under temporary receivership, and your defense grid has been converted into a public solar collection array. If you'd like to negotiate a payment plan for your re-entry into galactic society, please press 1. Zalthor stared blindly into the darkness, his crystal fingers trembling as he held the dead communicator. There were no glorious final stands, no defiant last words. Just a blinking red light on a silent console, reminding him that the universe now operated on Earth Standard Time. The news of the Varian Concordat's swift, bloodless reclassification traveled across the Perseus arm faster than subspace relay cables could carry it. Within 48 hours, the galactic wire services stopped reporting troop movements and fleet deployments entirely. Instead, they began broadcasting live feeds of interstellar stock exchanges, plunging as half a dozen major empires, hastily liquidated their war bonds to pay off accumulated municipal parking and zoning infractions. On Station Null Zero, the Galactic Council's Grand Assembly Hall was no longer a place of fiery rhetoric and saber-rattling. It had been officially partitioned into regional filing hubs, complete with queuing ropes, digital ticket dispensers, and a battery of bilingual human intake clerks wearing powder blue Oxford shirts. High above the bustling chamber, in the quiet, climate-controlled comfort of a newly designated Terran sector office, Charles Vance sat at his minimalist teakwood desk. He was methodically reviewing a glowing digital manifest of newly acquired public utilities when the heavy frosted glass door swung open. Sarah Chen stepped in, holding a steaming mug of black coffee and a datapad that was flashing a slow, steady amber. "Well, Charles, the dominoes are officially falling," Sarah announced, leaning against the edge of the desk with a knowing smirk. "The Orion Syndicate just surrendered their entire northern trade fleet without firing a shot. They realized their logistics software was running on an unpatched Terran OS from 2084, and their entire military network just legally defaulted to our jurisdiction." Charles didn't look up from his screen. He simply took a slow, measured sip of his own coffee, his wire-rimmed glasses catching the soft green reflection of a newly balanced ledger. "Naturally," Charles replied smoothly. "You can't wage an interstellar war when your logistics supply chain requires a valid digital signature and a quarterly safety inspection. It's an administrative bottleneck." "An administrative bottleneck," Sarah chuckled, shaking her head. "That's one word for it. The Emperor of the Syndicate is currently sitting in queue number 412 downstairs, clutching a folder of planetary deeds and crying because he forgot to renew his orbital waste disposal permit." Charles set his mug down, folded his hands neatly on the desk, and looked out the reinforced glass window toward the Grand Assembly floor below. Thousands of alien dignitaries, warlords, monarchs, and merchant kings who had once terrorized the quadrant were quietly standing in orderly lines, waiting for their turn to fill out change of ownership forms and tax compliance disclosures. There were no explosions, no planetary sieges, just the rhythmic, soothing click-clack of digital keyboards and the low murmur of bureaucratic submission. "The universe was always a mess, Sarah," Charles said softly, a faint, satisfied smile touching the corners of his mouth. "It just needed someone willing to look past the lasers and read the fine print." He tapped a key on his terminal, closing out the final spreadsheet of the morning. "Now," Charles said, standing up and straightening his tie with crisp precision, "let's go down to reception. I believe we have an emperor who needs to learn how to fill out Form 1040 Alpha. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more incredible stories. Hit the bell icon to stay updated on our latest uploads.